Welcome to
Look, Mum, no hands.
We have an amazing show today, exploring those scary choices life presents through the lived experience of our guests.
Many of you will recognise that incessant whisper in your ear, tugging you to change your life, squaring up for the big jump.
Whether it's career, life, family or love, there's that saying, if you're unwilling to be a foolish beginner, you will never improve.
Or as I say, a life lived in fear is only half a life.
Hello and welcome to another episode. This week we're with Nicola Rossi. Hello, Nicola.
Hello.
How's everything?
Things are good, thank you.
Excellent. Now, Nicola has actually been on our previous show, hasn't she, Daniel?
Yes, we interviewed her as an author who had made a big career change from being in-house communications guru at some phone company. Are we allowed to mention names? Vodafone.
And BT before that.
And BT.
God, it's a bit of a habit.
So funny enough, she talked herself into exactly what we're trying to do in this show, which is looking at people who've made big changes, taken big risks in their life, not the ones that have just stuck it out for 35 years and picked up the pension at BT, but the ones who said, no, you know what, I'm going to change my life. So what did you do, Nicola?
Well, I would say I started small. What I did eventually was become a published author who can even speak occasionally. And
you're not caffeinated enough yet, obviously.
No, clearly. And I've now got a TV deal for my books.
Woo!
So that's
Congratulations.
it in a nutshell. But it was a long process. Starting from really, I always wanted to write, but I never quite had the other bits of my life in the right place to allow me to focus on it properly.
Right. So what was going on?
Making a living. So I did an English degree when I left home in London. And I remember my dad saying to me, oh, God, what are you doing this for? What are you doing this for? Why don't you be a lawyer or an accountant? Because I have to pay people for those services. My dad had a small business. And I was like, God, Dad, it would be just so boring. And so English was the compromise. But
what was the thing you really wanted to do at that stage then?
I really wanted to be an actress, actually. But I'd had a discussion with the careers teacher at school who said, there's a lot of young girls like you who think they can act. And I was furious because he'd never seen me act. And it doesn't end well, so why don't you go and be a nurse? Anyway, I spoke to other people, and eventually someone at a university open day for a completely different subject said to me, what do you really like doing? And I said, I really like writing. And he said, well, this is the one time in your life you can spend 3 years doing something that you love. If you find you've got a vocation for something else, you can go on to that later, but spend 3 years doing the thing that you love doing.
That was great advice, wasn't it?
Yeah, fantastic. Really fantastic advice. And he was a lecturer in the political history of the Industrial Society at Salford University. And I was looking there at a sort of industrial relations degree. God knows, anyway. So he gave me great advice. And so I was able to do some writing for 3 years with some really great tutors. Then you couldn't do there were very few creative writing courses, and I certainly wasn't steered towards one by my school. But actually it was great to have 3 years reading books that otherwise I would never ever have touched.
Yeah, because finding time to read a book these days.
Yeah, exactly.
You just spend 3 years.
You're talking to a failed lawyer here. I did the whole shtick. And then realised the thing that really upset me about the law was filling in timesheets. Every 5 or 6 minutes of your life you had to account for. Yeah. Can you think of anything worse than that? I mean, however much they pay you, not worth it. So I had to find something else to do.
Yeah, people in PR agencies have to do the same thing. Which is another place that I didn't last very long.
No. So you from way back you had this sort of calling, should we say, to write?
I did always want to write. And also, I mean, I loved watching television. So I was an only child. I grew up over an ice cream shop. We had no garden. And I am an introvert, apparently with occasional extroverted behaviour. And I spent a lot of time thinking and kind of doing creative things, really, as a child.
So did you have access to the ice cream shop, or was that separate?
Oh, unlimited, yeah.
So flavours?
Pink and white. He did have peach and chocolate for a while, but he said it didn't improve sales, so he stopped doing it.
So it was kind of Napolitano, was it?
It was, so there was soft scoop, as you would call it, which was, dug out of a huge metal thing, and then there was also the thing that you pull the handle.
The Carpigiani machine.
The Carpigiani, you know.
I had an ice cream
eh?
round when I was making money in my university holidays.
Yeah,
actually.
so we did have we had 2 Carpigianis on the front window, and then the other kind of ice cream that you kind of scoop out and stick in a wafer or whatever,
So, what's your relationship with ice cream today?
Picky.
Yeah. Are you more of a soft scoop or a Carpigiani girl?
I'm not really a Carpigiani girl, even though it was the same It was the same mix that went into both.
It's proper ice cream, isn't it?
Yeah,
I used to get a 10-litre vat of it to take in the van, every day.
Yeah, but I quite like a Madagascan vanilla. But there's nothing like the ice cream that you get in Italy. Particularly this summer, I had something called The Taste of the South, which had like orange and lemon and bits of meringue and pistachio, really intensely sweet. You can only have 1 scoop. You need a bit of pistachio on the side with it, or maybe coffee. Anyway, I could go on about ice cream forever.
So your home life was sort of unlimited ice cream, no garden, and you had to invent imaginary friends to play with, presumably.
Well, yeah, and 2 very busy parents who were working in the shop.
Do you think that start in life was part of your sort of vivid imagination, which comes through enormously in your books?
Absolutely. I'm certain of that. Yeah, absolutely sure of it. Yeah,
how did that find expression as a child?
I got obsessed with drawing Frankenstein's monster. We had these cardboard, like little menu cards for the shop that we didn't use really, and so they were given to me to draw on. And I used to draw these Frankenstein's monsters with a big square face and the bolts coming out of the neck. I drew that a lot, and I used to make clothes for my dolls, which were less horrific than that, but in the latest 1960s style. So I was quite crafty, a bit of writing, but making and drawing as well.
I know we jump around a bit, Nicola, but you presented your 3 books, Rockstar Ending, Rock On and Rockaway. I'm looking at them now, and I seem to remember that you commissioned or wanted a particular artist to design the covers.
Yes, I
and
did.
I can't help think there's a bit of a connection here between all of that and your Frankenstein sort of drawings as a young girl.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is there something there that I'm on the right lines?
Yeah, you are. And funnily enough, so Tim Doyle, who did the illustrations that are used on my covers, is an artist based in Austin, Texas. And I first found his pictures in a shop called the Flood Gallery in Greenwich, where they stock a lot of his stuff. And then subsequently I got to meet him, and he was over in London. So we spent a bit of time together a few months ago. And I discovered that, like me, he had had a childhood in front of the television.
I thought you were going to say above an ice cream shop.
No, not above an ice cream shop, but in front of the television and, watching a lot of the same programs I did. So there's something about, being an introverted child who is immersing themselves in popular culture that leads to this kind of thing, I think. But I hadn't even read the book Frankenstein then, of course, which, in my opinion, is one of the greatest books ever written, because of the tragedy of, what happens to the poor old monster, who's a murderer, I know, but still. You can't help but feel a huge sense of loss in that book.
The most amazing thing about that book is that Mary Shelley wrote it when she was 19.
Oh, yeah.
And and it stood the test of time. It's been reinterpreted in so many ways, hasn't it?
Yeah.
It's an incredible piece of work.
Yeah, really stunning.
Most people don't understand that Frankenstein's monster was not Frankenstein, as you say. The doctor, the mad doctor, was Frankenstein, and the monster was something else, not Frankenstein himself. Yeah. Okay. So some people might think you had a rather idyllic childhood above an ice cream shop. It could only have been better if it was a confectionery and ice cream shop in some ways with unlimited access. But
there was some confectionery as well.
so the 99 for the flake, you mean?
Yeah, but also various kinds of boxes of chocolates and stuff, any port in a storm, really. And if I look at the pictures of the family businesses, from the 1930s onwards, they've all got these stickers on the windows that say, Fry's chocolate, Cadbury's chocolate. So they were confectioners. In fact, on one of the census records, my grandfather is described as a confectioner. Bizarrely, anyway.
So your dad was encouraging you to do something more
financially lucrative.
Yes.
More certain.
Yeah.
Maybe.
A bit rigid.
Yeah.
So what encouragement did he give afterwards when you went on to do English and then throughout? Is he still around?
No. Both my parents are long gone, but he was really proud that I got a degree, because my generation was the first, like many second generation immigrants. We were the first generation to go to university, so he was really proud about that. And then I did 2 sabbatical years in the Students' Union as a campaigner, and he found that a bit harder to understand, but he kind of went with it. And then I think I knew he was really proud of me when I was in one of my first jobs and I'd got a company car. And I'd only got a company car because I was hassling for a pay rise and they didn't want to do that. But one of the directors was getting a new car, so they had this car lying around, so they gave it to me. And I told my dad that I'd got this car. And one of my friends phoned home to say, could she get a lift back up north for Christmas? And I already had a car full of people. So I said no. And she said to me, your dad said to me that you're an executive now with a company car. So in the eyes of someone who's had a small business, never really been short of cash, but, not had his success recognised in that kind of a way, or, had professionals of any kind really in the family.
Right.
It was a big deal. It was a big deal.
I can imagine.
So you're talking, Nicola, a lot about your father. Yeah. I mean, this show is called Look Mum, No Hands, you see. And in a previous interview, it took 49 minutes and 23 seconds before our interviewee finally admitted it was all about his mother after having talked about his father for the previous one. And so how long are you going to keep us waiting?
I've kept everyone waiting on this because it's something that is really hard for me to talk about, but I'm going to do it today.
Okay. Should we leave it for later? Do we need...
No, let's do it now. Let's do it now. This is the time. I've got to get used to talking about this.
Right.
Because my mother took her own life when she was 54 and I was 20.
Oh, wow.
So that has been a massive influence on the subject matter of my book.
Yes. In dealing with death alone, when death occurs naturally or through illness, it's a different type of grief. But then to lose someone who takes their life, or I think it's been in the news recently, this dancer actor from the Ellen show who took his own life, and everything seemed nice and homely and life looked good, but then you look at some of the other people who are just booking their ticket to Dignitas. There've been a couple of kind of famous artists and writers recently who have done that. Yeah,
because they've seen that as a more civilised choice.
We're definitely going to come on to that. I didn't know the answer to that question, sorry, when I asked it. You have to be careful what you ask for in life, don't you?
Well, I could have said I'd rather not talk about it.
You could.
So thank you for asking it. It's okay.
No, I mean, I think, funny enough, we've from previous interviews, there are sort of 2 models that we've identified. One is making your parent proud. The other is defying their lack of belief in you. They're 2 big motivators, and they're quite different, aren't they? They're, trying to demonstrate success and trying to defy their lack of belief by showing that you've made it. And of course, you've raised now a third one, which I feel unequal to the task of really talking about, which is to honour the memory in some way, or, the unlived life that you presumably carry on in some way.
Yeah.
Is that right? Am I on?
There's definitely some of that, but actually for both of my parents, there was a sense that, they tie themselves into a family business, and that was it. My dad would have liked to have gone to Durham University and to do science. He was good at physics. He ended up being a pilot in the RAF, and he was always interested in all sorts of different things. And at one stage, he even wanted to expand the business locally, and the family said no. So he was always deeply frustrated, but felt out of a sense of duty, he had to stick with the family business. My mother had a job in a bank when she met my dad and felt that she should get in with a family business. Now, I don't know if you've seen The Godfather, but there's a thing in The Godfather where all the brothers and the sister, they're all together and they talk about the business and the wives are outsiders. And, you know, while our business was nothing like the business of The Godfather, there is a sense of that in Italian families. You know, if you're an outsider, I think that was difficult. But also she worked non-stop in the family business and really felt that her life was frustrated and, apart from me, quite pointless. So it was... So I think she would have been very proud of what I've done, actually. But she had 3 things that she wanted me to do. They were learn to drive, which I did. Don't get married before you're 26, and then she changed that to 28.
Okay.
And go to university. So those were the 3 things which she thought would give me the independence, which she didn't have. So, you know, I did those things, and I am completely independent. I mean, I love my family and I love being with them, but I'm not with them because of economic pressure.
Right.
I'm with them because I love them and I want to be there.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's also a great thing to give to someone, to be able to make that choice. And a lot of people don't get to do that.
It's interesting, you know, you talked about having a family business, a shop, and the sense of duty of, you know, keeping that going. So I'm just interested in that concept of duty, because I was always the one growing up that was the dutiful son, you know. Even today, although I have lots of siblings, when they all know it's a job for Daniel, you know, if it's something.
You're the eldest?
No, but I'm kind of the lawyerish one, you know what I mean?
Okay, yeah.
Got your head screwed on.
If it's an emotional thing, my elder brother deals with it, and if it's a practical thing, I deal with it. But coming back to duty, do you think duty is sort of like a positive reason for sticking with something, or do you think it's like a sort of an avoidance mechanism as well, that you can sort of not think about changes, not think about different directions, because you can sort of hide behind a sense of duty?
I think that's true, and I think it can be really scary for people to contemplate being anything other than what they imagine themselves as. You know, I think it's really hard for people to change.
Project a different life, you mean?
Yeah.
Let's turn to your moment then. You're at Vodafone, are you?
Yeah.
And what's happening that leads you to reach escape velocity?
I've been doing the same job for 6 years. There was nowhere obvious to go inside the business. I was relatively senior, so you know, it's like a pyramid. When you're relatively senior, there aren't many places that you can move sideways. Yeah. And I think I kind of just topped out there, really. And I'd been doing the same kind of thing for 30 years. And I was bored. I mean, I worked with some lovely people. There were elements of my job and my daily life that I really enjoyed. I looked forward to seeing the people I work with. I looked forward to, bizarrely, my bike ride into work and back, which was an hour each way. You know, I look forward to some of the international...
Was that good thinking time, by the way?
It was great thinking time, yeah. It was a great transition time. And I used to go in all weathers. You know, it was when it was crazy, when most people would not be on a bike. Yeah. I would be on it because I just needed that space. It was like a gift to me.
Yeah.
So I think we're always trying to make sense of our lives. You know, some of it goes on in our sleep, which we don't know a whole lot about, but certainly having an hour to yourself just to sort of keep an eye on the road. But it doesn't require a huge amount of the brain to...
No, I did occasionally zone out completely and nearly hit something, but, you know, that's...
Yeah, if you take the same route every day, you can find that you just can't remember the last 5 minutes. You know, you're probably doing all the right things, but something else was in control.
Yeah, that's right.
All right, so but maybe we should have dealt with both elements of this. So you leave university having studied English.
Yeah.
And you don't pursue that as your sort of vocation, should we say? You go into a more of a career structure.
Yeah, it was always just a means to an end. I remember people in Southport saying, "So are you going to be a teacher then?" I'd be like, "No."
So you've been offered teacher, you've been offered nurse by various people.
But there was something that I had been doing since I was a child, which
making Frankenstein monsters.
I did that, but I also used to write to newspapers. So when I was at primary school, I had letters published in various publications. You know, Look In, the Junior Radio Times, the Daily Mail, and of course I had a picture.
She winced.
Yeah, well, who wouldn't? And it was a really sanctimonious little note anyway. And also, I sent a picture to Vision On. And everyone went,
Vision On?
Don't you have to be deaf? And I said, well, no, you don't, actually. So I was already corresponding with the media. And when I ended up in PR, it felt like the job that I was born to do. Because I knew when I sent that letter off to Vision On that if I put in that really good picture of my cat, they would publish my letter. And of course they did. Ahead of my time. Look at the internet. They all learnt it from me.
Yeah, the internet is a strange combination of cat videos and horrible stuff, isn't it?
Well, exactly, yeah. I tend to just do the cat video type stuff. Who knows?
Okay. So in fact, it was a natural progression, really, going into PR.
It was really, and I enjoyed the kind of campaigning and lobbying side of being a student union.
And you had to use your writing skills, presumably, if you're writing releases and whatever.
Yes, and also, but even as a student union officer, I would be writing to members of parliament and arranging meetings, and I really enjoyed the kind of the lobbying side as well as the, trying to get them to do various things, campaigning.
Yeah. Okay, so it wasn't a sort of a compromise at that point, really. You didn't feel like much.
I would have liked to have gone to work for a charity or some sort or a union or something, but I wasn't a member of a political party. I was sort of independent left. So I didn't really have a network, and all the people I knew who were getting those jobs had networks. And I did go for one interview, so I was on the court of the University of London, which is it was like the board.
Yeah.
And a friend said to me, look, you need to use your contacts to try and get a job. So I approached various people on the court, and they put my CV forward to people that they knew. And God bless him, Sir Peter Parker, who was running British Rail at the time, sent my CV off to a few PR agencies. And I got this interview, and I can't remember the agency now.
Saatchi.
No, it wasn't Saatchi.
No.
It was a big global agency, and even if I could remember, I don't think I would say which one. And they looked at my CV and they said, why do you want to work here? And I said, well, I think I'd be good in PR. And he said, do you know who our clients are? And of course, it wasn't like today when you can go on the internet and look at the client list.
Yeah.
I'd have had to go to, a reference library and go through press cuttings, and I hadn't done that. And I said, no. And they were working for one of the South American governments or Central American governments that was executing people in football stadiums and trying to cover it up.
Oh, God.
And he said, you do know we work for this government, don't you? And I was never very good at the international side. And when I remember when I was going into the hustings to be student union president, one of my lefty friends said to me, right, how are you on Nicaragua? And I'm like, I don't know, what about El Salvador? I don't know. And she said, right, now, after me, Sandinistas good, Contras bad. So this was my level of political understanding in terms of world politics. Mm. But I knew this country, that something had gone wrong there. And I said, well, I just tried to be professional. And he said to me, so you're saying you would defend this regime for us? And I said, well, I need a job. And all I could think of was, God, I've been on a student income for 5 years. I've got huge credit card bills. I have to do this, And he looked like a man who himself wasn't comfortable with working on that account. And I didn't get the job. So I've always been grateful for that. And throughout my career, I've never been asked to make that kind of a compromise.
Right.
I've stuck to organisations which I thought have been doing fairly benign things, So that has been quite good.
I actually heard this great Peter Parker story, the guy running British Rail, that they were looking for a new advertising agency, and Saatchi's, that's why I mentioned Saatchi. He was invited in by Saatchi, and they had him in the waiting area, and he kept going up to the reception saying, I'm on time, what's going on? And she would say, well, they're a little behind time, but they're getting ready, don't worry about it. And he was kept for like half an hour with being fobbed off, and then he's ushered in. And they're all obviously have been ready for ages, and they just say, well, now you know what it's like to be a British Rail customer.
Yeah. It's easy, isn't it, to look back at when it was nationalised and we think the trains all ran on time, but...
So, Nicola, maybe I'm projecting some of me onto you, but I'm going to ask you a question that I think about. So I might have been a photographer in another life, you see. That's my sort of your actor point. And so in a way, the photographer I never was has continued a parallel existence. alongside the Daniel that I am, although I'm a very good amateur photographer, should we say. Do you still have a sort of a track for your frustrated actor career that didn't happen? Was that an opportunity for you to be somebody more than you were, because of maybe your quite small start to life in some ways, your constrained start to life? So is that still an operating factor in the way you approach life?
I do still really enjoy performing. So when I get to do readings from my books or to write commissions and perform them at festivals, I really, really love that. I'm never nervous in a bad way. You hear about musicians who are physically ill before they go on stage because they hate it so much, whereas I love it. It's such a buzz. You're giving me that look of recognition.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, both of your dads were RAF pilots as well, which hasn't come out yet.
Interesting. Yeah.
But no, that buzz before you go on, it's like, if you're nervous to the point it makes you ill, it's like when we spoke to Niall in one of our earlier episodes. He was acting, but he was getting ill from it. He was so nervous, he felt uncomfortable, but he was good. But the process beforehand just didn't gel with him, but when you get the buzz of excitement, that's when even when I come in here and I set things up, I get excited. It's like,
me too. Yeah, but there is that. I think if I went back to it now, I'd be really worried about not being able to remember my lines. I can remember poems from when I was, when I did drama exams when I was a teenager, but whether I could learn a whole script now, I don't know. Although with screen-based work, that's not so much of an issue.
No, it's little bite-sized chunks, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's bring you back to the moment you're sitting in your office. You've done 30 years.
Yeah.
Just remind me, I'm sorry to interleave this, but your mum, when did she take her life in relation to all this?
So I was 20, so it's when I was at university, in
Right.
my second year at university.
And are you conscious of, how do you see that now in terms of looking back and trying to understand your response to that?
Well, what I said to everyone was, because she'd had depression for a while and it wasn't her first attempt, in a sense it was a relief because I knew she'd done it and then I didn't have to wait for her to do it anymore. But that just masked a whole world of pain really underneath the surface. And also, she said she would wait until she felt I was able to do the look no hands thing. And we'd been out for dinner.
When you say she would wait,
she would wait. She had a plan.
Literally,
they ask people now, do you have a plan?
To make sure that you're okay and you're
blah, blah.
responsible and
She
know
would
that
wait.
you'll be okay.
Yeah. And she came down, we went out for lunch near my flat, and I was really wanting to kind of show off, I suppose, and I was talking to the waiters, blah, 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 I suppose it's an actory thing. And she said to me, "You've changed." And then she bought a bottle of whiskey, which she brought back to the flat and shared with my flatmates. And, when an alcoholic does that, you just think, I really wish you hadn't done that. And my flatmates are going, "This is really good fun. Your mum's great fun." And I'm like, yeah, well, maybe. And,
in small doses, perhaps, yeah.
Yeah. So, so that, I think she decided then. And then within a few months she was gone,
So you were on your way in life.
Yeah.
Okay. So, maybe I'm trying to weave together some of the strands of what's going on here. So you've got that as a bit of history, and then you're sitting in your plush offices somewhere thinking, I'm not really getting much out of this anymore.
Yeah.
Are those two thoughts connected in terms of making you want to do something and resolve some of this stuff? Is writing, because you went on, I believe you took a degree in creative writing at Goldsmiths.
No, I did a degree in digital media at Goldsmiths.
Oh,
so that was part of my escape plan.
Right.
So I'd been dabbling in writing all the way through, really, mainly journals. And I'd been to see a business coach when I was at BT, also frustrated, and I was running another business on the side because I was, I never really stretched to my full potential with my day job. And he said to me, if you put all your effort into your day job, you'd earn more money and things would be much better than, But why don't you write a short story? And I said, yeah, maybe I could do that. I thought, well, that's a bit piddling, isn't it? Why would I want to write a short story? But I did write an article. I spoke to a friend who was a journalist, and she had a contact on The Independent, and The Independent commissioned an article from me, and I wrote an article called My Uncle the Executioner, which was about another whole strand of my life, my childhood recollections of knowing the former state executioner, Albert Pierrepoint. So I wrote this little memoir piece. I tied it into an anniversary of one of his executions, and they ran it. And then I was at work, and I had to kind of fit it in around work. And because I worked in the media relations department, people were kind of supportive of that, so long as it didn't interfere with the day job. But then all these phone calls started coming in, and then I was invited to the Today programme to review the Pierrepoint film, and it was all just becoming too much. And I had 2 small children, and it was really important for me to keep my job. And never was there a hint that there was anything other than total support from my friends at BT. But I felt bad about it. And I wanted to be fully present with the family. I didn't want to be up in some room, locking myself away, trying to write an article with 2 toddlers banging on the door. So I decided then that I was going to postpone this writing thing. But by doing that one small thing, it gave me some validation that I could write. And the woman from the Today programme who interviewed me, who's still working there now, said to me, I couldn't believe that you were an unknown when I read that article. Wow. I couldn't believe it. And the subs hadn't touched it. They took out one tiny thing which they thought they might have a problem with the legal department, and everything else remained. So I kind of knew I could do it. And then I just had to keep working to support the family, really, by then. And so I carried on. And then I left BT and I went to work at the National Pharmacy Association. And then after 2 years there, they had a restructuring and I was out. And then I found the degree at Goldsmiths. I found this degree in digital media, and I thought, well, if I don't get a job, I'll do this, because I'd been fascinated with the digital environment for years. Yeah. I worked on early internet.
What year would we have been, Nicola? Sorry.
So this was about 2012 when I started at Vodafone. So about 2012. Yep. So about 10 years ago. I found the degree, and then I got this job at Vodafone, which I wasn't expecting to do. And I thought, well, I can't turn this down, because it was an area that I knew I could do very well. And I also knew that I wouldn't be able to do the degree part-time. So I parked it. And I remember being in the office one day, and one of the women who worked for me said, what would you do if you weren't here? And I said, I'd go and do this degree at Goldsmiths. And she said to me, you should do that. You should do that. And so it kind of lodged in my mind. And then I saw I keep getting business coaches, because I was seen as high potential and they wanted to keep me. I suppose that was why. Or it looked like I was struggling massively and needed a business coach. I don't know. I had this lovely coach, and she said to me, how much of your brain are you using in this job? And I said, about 15%. 15% of my potential.
15.
15, yeah. And her chin hit the deck, and she said, that's really low. And I said, well, yeah, but I need the money. We need the money. And she said, we need to think of a way to, what would you do if you weren't here? And I said, I'd do this thing at Goldsmiths. And we had a few more sessions, and she said, I think there's something in this Goldsmiths thing, So I went to an open day, and they said, well, look, you can do this. It's 2 short terms. So if you wanted, you could get 6 months off your day job, and you could have a sabbatical to do that, and then finish your dissertation when you go back to work. So that was what I did. So I went to my boss and I said, look, this is degrees in digital media, and that's really, really important for big companies to understand digital media.
You were so right, weren't you?
Yeah. How do you think I could get this sabbatical? And they knew I'd been there a long time and I was in the same job, and they didn't like keeping people in the same job and there was nowhere to go. And he said, well, write a business case. So I wrote a business case to him, and he put it to his boss, who was a lovely man. I would say that, wouldn't I? Because he came back and said, yeah, you can have the 6 months, and by the way, we'll pay most of your fees for you.
Amazing.
So, and I had the fees saved up, but that was okay. So I did that. But of course, when I went back, I'd completely changed. And also, while I was away at Goldsmiths, I entered a short story competition, and I wrote what became the first chapter of Rockstar Ending. And that also got some validation, because I got an award from the Orwell Society for it. And that also made, that was another huge, that was like a moment of calling. Because when I heard that I'd got the award, I had this massive emotional reaction. So I'm sat sobbing at my kitchen table, and my daughter walked in and said, "Mum, what's happened? What's happened?" And I said, I won't do the voice. So, George Orwell's son has read my story and he liked it, I said between sobs. And she said, "I'm going to make you a cup of tea now. I don't understand this, but I'm going to make you a cup of tea."
Yeah, that's the answer for everything, right?
Yeah, so I thought, something happening here. So I went back to work. I'd changed even more. I really didn't want to carry on. And I ended up leaving and then going off on a residential week with the short story with the Arvon Foundation, and then I came back with some more chapters written. So it's been about exploring, not letting this thing go. I don't think this thing would let me go. And then when I got the time, and of course by the time I'd done 30 years in a corporate career, and don't knock that BT pension fund that you mentioned earlier.
We're all jealous of it, us young ones.
Yeah. I was in a position to, and also, my kids are now grown up, so there's less demands at home financially, emotionally. So I had the space. Yeah. And now I may not have made it this far, but I have. So now was the time to do it.
All right, Nicola. I think you've covered a lot of territory there. I'm going to have to just back up a little bit. Can I just go back to the Albert Pierrepoint? Yes. What was the connection? You said there's a family connection.
Yeah, so this is bizarre. My parent, he used to have a pub in Manchester when he wasn't, because obviously being an executioner is not a full-time job. Thank goodness. Well, not here.
Actually,
not yet.
He did a lot of work after the war, dealing with the Nazis.
Yes, and that was a piece that I wrote about, actually.
Right.
It was the anniversary of him executing Aggressor.
Right.
Who was in Belsen, I think. So he had actually gone over to Hamelin to do that execution. And there is some archive footage on the BBC of him talking about that. But and anyway, so my parents used to go to he had a pub in Manchester called Help the Poor Struggler. And my parents used to go to the pub, and they got to know him. He was a real, it sounds bizarre, a very jolly, he walked into a room, you couldn't miss him. I don't know if you saw the play that was done about him in at the Royal Court.
He actually came to speak at the Cambridge Union when I was at university.
Yeah. So he was a big presence.
Yeah.
And then he retired to Southport. He bought a bungalow on Preston New Road. And he and his wife Anne didn't have any children. And I used to go and play there one afternoon a week. So I called them Uncle Albert and Auntie Anne.
All right.
So I knew them from when I was tiny till I left home.
You see, I mean, in the film, which I think is called The Last Executioner, is it? The Timothy
Spall.
It's called
Executioner Pierrepoint. Oh, no, you're right. It is called...
I'm not sure.
Yes, I think you're right. Yes, sorry.
But I mean,
The Last Hangman. I think.
Oh, The Last Hangman. That's
which, of course, he wasn't. But anyway, yeah.
But I mean, some people may not have watched the film, but I mean, he prided himself on reducing the time from the knock on the door of the condemned person's cell to the drop of the rope.
Yes.
And would cut bits and pieces out to make it as quick as possible. I think he reduced it to 7 seconds, amazingly. So there was as little sort of chance to think or be fearful, which is, of course, the complete opposite of, for instance, how things happen in America, with all the elaborate, horrible preparations that they subject people to. There's a reason for mentioning that, I guess, because I'm now drawing the strands together. So we've got your childhood Frankenstein monsters. We've got the terrible tragedy of your mum. We've got Albert Pierrepoint, whose job it is to dispatch people. And then you're thinking about dystopian, and you loved Mary Shelley, the book. When did you read that first? What age would you have been? Do you remember?
It must have been when I was at university.
Right.
Yeah, I think so, yeah. But I don't reread many books, but that one I've reread.
It's such an incredible... I can't recommend it too highly for anyone who hasn't.
It's beautiful and so modern.
Yeah. Anyway, so I'm trying to sort of draw these strands together, weave a little tapestry, which makes Rockstar Ending and the book that you developed out of your short story and the residential course that allowed you to build on that. So talk to us about that, why you're attracted by this dystopian world, which I think is what the Orwell Society is an award for what?
It was for writing dystopian fiction.
Yes, yeah, so it is. Yeah. You're in that world, aren't you?
Yeah, absolutely.
How do you see all that?
I think I was always interested in science fiction as that kind of that child above the shop, watching Doctor Who and Time Slip, Star Trek, all of those things really, really intrigued me. I think The Handmaid's Tale was a really influential book on me, not because, the things that happen to women in it are, of course, terrible, but for me, the horrific moment in that is when she puts her card in the ATM and it doesn't give her any money. And so there's a creeping horror in that book where an ordinary thing actually turns out to be a symptom of something far more sinister. So there's that. But also... something else, you asked me how I coped, and I think how I always cope with terrible things is through humour. And there's quite a lot of that in my books, which deal with a very dark subject. But some of the characters' resilience comes from their own, not necessarily sense of humour, but good humour, and participating in things that are really quite uplifting.
Yeah. I have to admit the denouement of Rockstar Ending, which I read a while ago now, but when everything goes wrong in the sort of the orderly process, I'm not going to give it away, is actually quite funny in a really macabre way, isn't it?
Yeah.
I don't know if you're allowed to laugh. It's very difficult to know what's appropriate to laugh at these days.
Yeah, well, when you're reading a book, no one can see you.
No, I was about to say, certainly at the cinema, it's a different story. But yeah, a book is a private matter.
Yeah. And if it helps you cope, then why not? I met on a skiing holiday, bizarrely. I met a woman who was a nurse working in palliative care. And she said to me, if people could hear the conversations that my colleagues and I have in the car on the way home from seeing a client, we would be sacked. But you know what? It helps us to cope.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's where you have to be like, well, if you're in that situation,
How
you
else
have
are you
to find
supposed to deal with it?
escapism. Yeah.
You do, yeah.
I have a question here that says, at what point did everything change? But listening to you speak, there's been several moments in your life where it seems like everything's just changed and then something else happened. And what do you think has been the major factor that's helped you make those changes each time?
I'm quite resilient. And I do have a what's the worst that could happen kind of a view.
We've heard that from everybody we've interviewed.
Yeah, but that within a framework of not taking ridiculous risks, So having recovered from all my student debt, I've been quite careful, and it took a long time to recover from that and to get through everything. But having come out the other end, where I feel, I ain't no millionaire, but we're okay at the moment. I'm not going to take any risks with that, but it gives me the permission to have the other risks. So it's a question of balancing them, really.
Yeah. Okay.
Does that answer your question? Can't remember what the question was now.
It was like, at what point did everything change?
So I think, at what point I think winning getting the award in the dystopian fiction competition was the point at which I realised I had to do this thing. I could be, that was like George Michael's song, there's someone else I'd rather be, and I remember dancing around my living room when the Olympics opening ceremony on my own, singing along to George Michael, there's someone else I'd rather be, and thinking, this is it. This is the thing I'd rather be. I'd rather be someone who has a more creative life and makes a contribution through that. Maybe, entertains people, makes them think, makes them laugh. That's my thing to give. It's not helping a big company sound palatable.
And has there been a time where you thought that whatever you do, this might not work, and thought like you could end up, you had no idea where it would lead? Has there been that, I've done this, you've entered your story for the competition, it's gone out there, you're like, you've done this course, you've taken time off work, and you're like, well, I'm doing this, but I don't know where it's going to take me off to. And would you have gone back to your corporate job?
I mean, I did do the odd job application, but my heart wasn't in it. You know? And then when I realised I didn't need to, then after that, I just thought, foot off the gas as far as that stuff's concerned. I did a little bit of lecturing. Someone asked me which I ended up doing, and I enjoyed meeting the students, but really I didn't want to be doing that anymore. Yeah. I wanted to be doing creative stuff.
Yeah.
You're going to have to help me here, Nicola. I'm having all sorts of crazy thoughts, but I'm sort of.
I love crazy thoughts.
I'm sort of thinking that really your frustrated acting career is really what you've turned this into. You're acting out another you, aren't you?
Or was I acting out? I think it's the other way round. I think I was acting out corporate woman.
That was the act, you mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
And this is the natural.
This is the
Nicola
me. Yeah, this is
Rossi.
actually me. Yeah. Whereas the other stuff was a means to an end.
So you were putting on a face for a corporate world.
No doubt about it. And actually, I remember going to a one of those presentation skills courses where they film you, and I thought. Sorry, I'm not allowed to swear, am I? Oh, what on earth?
We'll give you one.
For fuck's sake, what am I doing? I look like bloody Margaret Thatcher. What am I doing? And I was, sitting up, yes, and I just stop, don't be this person. And
we nearly got an explicit rating there.
And I when I resigned from BT because I'd got another job to go somewhere else, and we on another one of these management team building things. And we had to do this thing when you wrote Post-it notes about what you thought about your colleagues and give them feedback. Right. This lovely new manager would come in desperately trying to get a dysfunctional team to gel. God bless him. And someone said to me, "Do you know what? I like you so much more since you've resigned." And I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Well, you say what you think. You're funny. All of these things which we didn't know that you were like, and now we can see them." And I only felt safe enough to do that after I'd resigned. So that, this, people talk about authenticity, but that was a real eye-opener for me.
I don't know if there's a similarity, which I could recognise in what you've just said, in terms of when I do my portrait photography, which is quite often the secret, is to tell them it's all over and then take the next picture. Yeah. And that's the picture. Yeah. That's the true
the Columbo moment.
Yeah, that's because all the other stuff's been putting on a face for the camera, pose, and then suddenly you catch the natural look.
Yeah.
But I think, I don't know if you ever saw those portraits of Diana by Mario. Is it
Testino?
Testino.
Yeah.
Incredibly natural ones, because we had all this highly glammed up version of her, and then he just took some very natural, incredible photographs of her.
He had a beautiful exhibition at the Portrait Gallery many years ago.
Yeah. So maybe there's an element. All right, so that's interesting. I got it the wrong way round, but there was still this sort of tension between the natural, authentic you and the corporate face that you were putting on and everything. So,
absolutely. Yeah, I really felt I had to be someone different in order to succeed.
Don't be worried if I cry a lot. I get quite emotional by these things. And look, so what is it about you that took you down the dark side then? I mean, just to ask a question, do you see yourself as an optimistic person or more of a pessimistic person in life?
I'm really optimistic.
Optimistic. So tell me more about what you think took you down the dystopian side, the dark side, in terms of your novels to date.
I think the only way you can avoid something bad happening is by understanding that it's there in the first place. So I think that's probably what it's about. So when I was doing the digital media degree, I learned to do all sorts of amazing things, like, download Twitter data and map it, and because understand stuff that was happening beneath the surface with big tech. And I don't by any means think it's all bad, but I think there's all sorts of stuff that can happen, particularly coercive affordances that happen through big tech, which I thought people should really try to understand a bit more about. And that was what I wanted to put into the books.
Right.
Really, I think. They're about the choice and coercion and manipulation. And
I was listening to something earlier this morning, actually, a podcast, which was talking about, say, Greenpeace, saying that they do a really incredible job. You might not agree with all their tactics, sort of strapping themselves to something, but they make you look at the issues.
Yeah, well, absolutely.
And they bring publicity and attention to the issues. And if you didn't have Greenpeace, people, the corporates would be able to quietly get on with their nasty activities.
And that's the journey that my heroine Lexi is on as you go through the series. So she begins by just trying to help a group of people personally, and then she realises that she's actually got to get media and political attention on the subject to really change things. And there's a personal cost to that, because she's repeatedly exposing herself to all kinds of trauma in the process of trying to change the world. So I kind of look at that as well.
Where are you on Extinction Rebellion and gluing yourself to the M25? Is that part of the sort of, do you think that's justified?
Yes, I do think it's justified. I know it's disruptive, but, I think I completely understand where they're coming from, And I was an activist. I was rubbish at demonstrations. If someone got arrested, I'd be crying. I'd have to be sent back to phone round police stations because I was just terrible at it. I remember some friends going down to Wapping when the big Murdoch dispute was on. Yeah. And they said, do you want to come down? And I'm like, well, perhaps I should, And my friend Liz, he said to me, you'll be useless. They're violent. You'll start crying and it will just be terrible. So I said, okay, yeah, no, I won't do that then. So I'm really, really bad in those situations myself, but I'm glad that there are people who are prepared to take those risks.
So, are you leading me in the direction that your writing and your attempt to understand the dystopian side of some of these new trends is really like a warning for people to be more aware, more prepared, more resilient.
And not to sleepwalk into situations,
Right.
And I suppose I'm thinking particularly about the assisted dying stuff, which has gained a lot of momentum in various countries.
Yeah.
And
we were talking about Canada, or exchanging thoughts, which seems to, for everything we understand about Canada, which is incredibly liberal and free, it seems to have done some pretty nasty things of late, including the convoy attacks and the Emergency Powers Act. And then I was reading about this MAIDS thing, which is some sort of assisted dying program.
I had a look at. I think I think 31,000 people have now taken assisted dying in Canada.
But they weren't suffering from incurable diseases, were they?
The average age is 74.
Right.
But I think there's a discussion now about widening the accessibility from people with terminal conditions to people who are mentally ill. So going through other kinds of pain. And I find that I just really worry that will become too widespread. So after my mum died, my dad found it wasn't before, in the run up to my mum dying. She had joined an organisation called Exit, who are now a different organisation. I think they're now Dignity in Dying, but it's the antecedents.
Yeah.
And they had produced a leaflet which was called something like Helping Self-Deliverance. I can't remember the title of it, but you can look at the law reports. There was they eventually withdrew it after someone went to the High Court because it was a list of descriptions of people dying in really horrible agony and then instructions on how to take your own life. And this leaflet was found next to a number of people who'd taken their own life. And my dad said, she's been getting this stuff and it's just loads and loads of descriptions of people dying in pain. And he thought that was a factor in her deciding to take her own life. She had back chronic back pain and various other things. And so that makes me worry about this kind of material appearing elsewhere. And of course now, if you listen to, Molly Russell's father talking about her taking her own life, having been exposed to all sorts of stuff on the internet, and she's not the only teenager, and then you start looking at, anyone who's vulnerable, where do you draw the line? And I don't think you can draw that line very easily. And I do worry that we'll change the law in the way that Canada did, saying, it's just a few people, who are in terrible pain. And I listened to the Lord's debate, and there were descriptions of people with the most horrific symptoms, and you can understand them not wanting to live. But really, once you open that door, how do you stop the slippery slope? And I think that's what they're wrestling with in Canada, and I think it's what they're going to be looking at as part of the Select Committee inquiry that's now happening here.
Yeah, I mean, does one have to have a bit more of a philosophy of what life is all about I mean, they're both ends of the spectrum are currently under discussion. Well, in America, because of Roe versus Wade, which, as a comedian said the other day, he thought was a sort of emergency exit from a canoe. You know, the two options, Roe versus Wade. All right, didn't work. But yeah, you know, the point being that the right to life, at what point life begins, or, you know, all of this stuff, and then you're talking about the other end of that process. But you know, one can't think about either of them without having some conception, a great word, Daniel, of life and what it's all about.
Well, yeah, and what is the difference between choice and coercion? That I worry most about, what people being coerced into things that they may otherwise, being caught at a vulnerable moment and making a wrong decision.
Are you thinking about both ends of that discussion there, or only the far end?
I've thought I'm very much pro-choice in terms of abortion. With assisted dying, I think you make it. I think that's the scope for manipulating people is really horrific there, and perhaps that's because that's an area that I have more experience of, having witnessed someone take their own life myself. I don't know. Yeah.
I mean, what do you think about suffering and the stoicism that people can show dealing with troubles and so forth? I mean, do you think people are entitled to throw in the towel in some way? And even if it's different from one person to another, I mean, that when we're talking about legislation, you can't have that subjective element, can you? I mean, we get it in identity politics. People are whatever they say they are, and we seem to have reached a point where you can't argue with that. So is that going to infect the whole when life is not worth living debate as well?
I think if the law changes, there need to be really, really robust safeguards. And I don't know how enforceable that would be, but I think that has to be the case. But I also think we need to be thinking much more. I mean, it's also, think about the online harms bill, which has been foundering for bloody years now. That's something else that really needs to be addressed. Because what if you legalise assisted dying and you don't have laws around the promotion? Then what?
I mean, the lawyer in me, Nicola, which is still there somewhere vestigially, knows the difference between objective and subjective tests. Definition of theft is the dishonest appropriation of property belonging to another with the intention to permanently deprive. Each of those has been tested in the court. They're all objective. Dishonest is the only one where the jury can have a sort of bit of access to, was that really dishonest or was it accidental or something? But when you get onto all of this hate crime, hate speech, meaning of life, worth of life, when you say robust controls or protections, they're all going to be, at the end of the day, what is the difference between offence and I can't even think of another word right now. How is it received? Sorry, this is the point I'm really trying to make. How is it received rather than how is it intended? And the subjective-objective condition. So are you ever going to be able to define something in legislative terms that is robust? Because isn't it just going to be suffering from some incurable permanent condition? And is that ever going to provide sufficient protection? Something that's drafted in words like that. I really made a fist of that.
I don't know. That's a really tough question. But what I do know is at the moment, people who are affluent just go to Switzerland.
Yeah.
People who are poor just
find their own way. May I ask, having written and I don't know, it's quite emotional, having written about dying, assisting dying, and having someone who has taken that life, what would you have done differently, being a 20-year-old at uni, to keep your mum or make her feel more comfortable and know that she could? Is there something that would have changed there? Or how would you have thought?
There was absolutely nothing I could do.
Yeah.
One thing I'm sure of is that there was absolutely nothing I could do. I suppose I could have pretended to not be able to manage on my own. Mm-hmm. But then that wasn't true, because look at me, I'm still here. So I've got a lovely family. I've managed to, make it work, which is what she would have wanted. So I don't see what else I could have done.
Yeah.
Really.
So you knew the time was coming when, you didn't know the exact time, but you knew she tried before.
I always knew, yeah. We always knew it was coming.
And did that affect your time? No, it's like, did that affect your time with her? Do you feel
we didn't really talk about it, but we knew. I mean, she was very open about it.
Yeah, which is
amazing.
amazing.
When she came out of, she went into a mental hospital she was first attempt when I was a teenager, and she came out with a plan. It was absolutely clear she had just come out with a plan.
Wow. So do you think you processed a kind of grief before she'd gone?
I think probably some of it, yeah.
Yeah.
Because I knew I couldn't change her.
Yeah.
There was nothing in the world that was going to change her. It was too late. Maybe there were things that could have happened in her life earlier on. And I remember saying to my dad, Mum's not really happy here. Do you think, why don't you get, the child's eye view, why don't you just rent her a flat on Lord Street and then she could live separately from you? And he said, well, she couldn't look after herself. I cook all the meals. She would be much worse if she lived. And so in his own way, although he was kind of enabling her, he was also trying to look after her as much as in his own way, in their own way between them,
I mean, when we devised the title of this podcast series, Look Mum, No Hands, the thought we had was some child trying to scare and impress their mother at the same time, by doing this crazy thing on their bike. But you turned this thing on its head in a way, because the Look Mum, No Hands for you was a warning that you're now independent, and in a way you knew that would be a sign for your mum that you were on your way in life. Not with her full support and applause, but I mean, it had other connotations, is what I'm trying to say, from the one that we had in mind, where, the mum is just sitting at the garden gate watching you go by on the road and thinking, that's scary.
Yeah, and there hasn't been a moment in my life, when I've had a significant achievement. So like when I was elected president of the Students' Union, I went to a phone box and phoned my mum's sister. To say, this is happening. She said, Mummy would have been so proud, and God, we were both in fucking pieces. Sorry, I swore again. We were both in pieces. And, and when I got married, my dad, damn fool, decided to stand on a small footstool to look at a bird out of the window 2 days before, fell off and banged his head. So neither of them could come to my wedding. And people say the best wedding picture is me looking exactly like you, Sarah, crying my eyes out with a tissue while signing the register. So at those big moments, yeah. But what's nice is, I have friends who knew her. Yeah. When I had my book launch, they were there and they were saying, oh, God, your mum would have been so proud of you. And would she, knowing the content of the book? I don't know.
Well, I mean,
but, it's what it is.
Picking up the theme of, impressing your mum or your memory of your mum, via her sister. But do you think you're saving the world through your books a little bit?
Oh, yeah. You're changing the world, not about saving it, but maybe changing it, maybe helping people to think about some of these huge issues that we all have to face.
Can I just take you a little bit deeper, Nicola, into that two-edged approach of social media and the power of some of these companies, which you seem to allude to earlier? There's some good stuff, but there's obviously some bad stuff. And where do you want to go with that thought?
On a very practical level, I'd like to see the online harms bill in the UK actually formulated and debated, and them to do something about the various things that are, particularly stuff around suicidal ideation, I think is really damaging, and self-harm. And, in a number of areas of life, on digital or even in finance, some pretty horrendous things have happened. And no one even goes to prison, so we really need to start thinking about at least fining these companies and making them take serious. I know it's really difficult. You've got a platform with billions of images on it. How on earth do you begin to to filter out the stuff which is inappropriate. And, you know, in the key Molly Russell image, it's a little cartoon of someone with a teddy bear. You know, so how do you, but
Can I offer you an answer to that?
Yeah.
As somebody who spent his life doing mergers and acquisitions and dealing with companies, the only thing that works is prison, the threat of prison for the chief executive and their entourage. If you fine a company, somebody else pays it. It only hits the shareholders, actually. It's got to be a personal, and if you make the threat of the chief executive or whoever it is go to prison, they will do everything that needs to be done to make sure they don't. They are brilliant at compliance and self-regulation and all of the things internally that no amount of legislation will ever achieve. So you need a good law, and I go back to my rather ham-fisted attempt to explain the objective-subjective thing, but you can't send someone to prison without it being very clear that they've done something that breaks the law. You need to know what the law is. And a lot of these things are bad. Sorry.
No, and I think you see that to some extent in corporate life, with certainly in the companies I've worked for, where they look really seriously at safety stuff. Really, really seriously at safety stuff, and that's because the consequences for the chief exec are pretty serious if they're seen to be negligent about safety. Yeah,
I mean, IKEA had a case with some bookcase being pulled over on top of a kid. And their whole business changed to prevent that ever happening again. And that's, look, I mean, corporate manslaughter is not quite worked the way they plan. But look, coming back to your books and your career, so you were saying that, I think I knew you were talking about a TV version of the story. Is that right? I mean, tell us a little bit more about where that's going.
Yeah, so in fact, I always saw it on a screen rather than in a book, but I had no idea how to make something happen on screen. And I spoke to a few people about it who said, do the book, at least then the story's out there. So that was what I did. But I grew up in front of the television and I see it in my head. And I was approached by a production company. They'd read the books and they wanted to option it. This happened last summer. So they are now working on getting it into screens, really. I can't say much more than that, but I'm really excited about it because it's where I always saw it going.
Yeah. My question is, will you be making a cameo appearance?
I have asked if I can do something. I won't say what.
Okay.
But how could I resist it? I've always wanted to be an actor.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and it's really funny. A load of my friends, actually, they're parents of my friends of my daughters from primary school, have said to me, "Can we be in the horror scene?" Which you need quite a lot of older people in. Can we be in the horror scene? So I said, I'll put your names forward.
I'm available.
You won't need to go to a background agency to get all the supporting artists if you've got everyone lined up ready.
I just want them all to be paid. That's the most important thing.
Oh, no, definitely.
Yeah, and the people I'm working with, they're really spot on for all of that stuff. So yeah.
Oh, fantastic.
How much artistic control do you think you'll have over the way the messaging and the...
Well, they're really interested in
Will you do the screenplay?
No, but I have looked at some CVs from possible screenwriters and given them my thoughts on that. So,
all right.
Oh, that's very exciting.
It's really exciting.
Well, I mean, it's so interesting, isn't it, that once you cut yourself free from the sort of discipline and the rigidities of corporate life, which has very certain sort of outcomes, doesn't it? I take your point about the BP pension. I wasn't knocking it. BT pension, rather.
Yeah.
But I mean, but once you cast yourself out on that voyage, all sorts of things can happen.
Yeah, that's right.
The scope is huge, and now if that's made into a TV series or whatever, that's going to take you in another huge direction.
It would just be fabulous. And, it's not that... Again, I don't want to knock people who say, you imagine it and it will happen. But if you don't imagine it, then it will never happen. So you have to start by think big.
You're talking about it. The times you mentioned to your business consultant coach that you were doing course one that you wanted to do at Goldsmiths. Yeah. You're telling people that you want to do this is going to happen, and then they give you the encouragement.
Yes, it's lovely when people say, "Well, why don't you do it then?" And actually, when I was thinking about writing the book, I remember going to that Waterstones in Greenwich for coffee with a couple of friends, and they said, "What do you want to do?" And I'm applying for jobs. I've been for an interview in Switzerland. I've been for an interview in Amsterdam. Blah, blah, and they said, "What do you really want to do?" And I said, "Well, I want to write the book, of course." Well, What are you waiting for?
Yeah.
What are you waiting for?
It's funny how these, bringing it maybe back to the central theme of the podcast, which is, about taking risks to follow something that really interests you in life. A lot of comments you've made have been about nudges and sort of support in not massive ways, but sometimes just exactly like that chat in the Greenwich Waterstones. I know exactly where you were, actually. I take my granddaughter up there, never pay for a book, but we read lots of children's books. Oops. And being open to them, though, and I think the fact that you were honest enough to show a bit of, let's call it, vulnerability to your friends, which is another thing that comes out a lot from these conversations, is being prepared to be vulnerable. And if you just clam up and say, I'm totally happy being a corporate person, you'll never allow that conversation to develop. You'll never allow that advice to be given.
That's right. And I think you need friends who can, you have to choose carefully who you show these things to.
Yeah.
But I have an old friend from primary school, and we had a teacher when we were 7, and she said to Jackie, "I'm going to come to your book launch," and she said to me, "And I will come to your opening night in the West End." Which was so sweet. That was before I went to senior school, and they told me not to be an actress. And so Jackie was, one of the first people that I showed the manuscript to, because I know she is an amazing writer. I mean, she's a copywriter, an award-winning copywriter, and her feedback was really important to me. And another friend from university, and just choosing very carefully people who are going to get it. But still are going to give you objective objective criticism back, And I remember Jackie saying to me, "This bit there was a bit about the characters going to Southport, funnily enough." And she said, "Oh, this is a bit long. I know why it's a bit long, because you're really enjoying it, but it's a bit too self-indulgent." And I thought, "I'm so glad you told me that." So, and you have to be open to that feedback, but you have to choose people who are going to give it to you nicely, because if they're just going to be horrible, you'll be recovering for years. So you really do have to do that. But I'm lucky to have that in my friends.
Yeah. And Nicola, what are you getting from it all? Everything that you've done and where you are now. What you say you've danced around the room when you get the great news, but what is it that really pushes you or leaves you satisfied? What's
really nice is when someone who has read the book gets in touch with me and says it means a lot to them, or there's something. So I have one particular reader who sent me a lovely David Bowie Christmas card this year. So, she's a similar age to me, but she's really interested in...
It was the Ziggy Pudding
The Ziggy Pudding card, yeah. But she has had some health problems, and she says she really likes the way that I write about, particularly in the later books, how people with disabilities start to feature in, the government and the corporation's attitude to people they might want to just erase. So knowing, and I went to a book club in Brockley, some people who read the book, and listening to them discuss the characters. So it's like you've created these things and people are engaged with them, and someone had misunderstood one of something that had happened, and the other two were going, no, that wasn't that, it was this. He did this. And it was just lovely to know that they'd enjoyed it, and it had made them think, and it had resonated with them.
Yeah.
Oh. Well, I must apologise for my blubbering mess this episode.
This is all wrong. The two interviewers have been crying, and our interviewee has just been sort of, serenely skating through all of this. But there we go. Sometimes it's like that. But Nicola, it's been amazing. Even though we've interviewed you before, and maybe for a very different reason, back in the homespun wisdom days, I think we really got to tackle some of the real gritty stuff in your life today. And I'm sure that many of our listeners will pick up on these underlying themes of being honest about what you want from life, and having the courage and choosing your moment to seize the opportunity, and then opening up a whole new chapter, literally, of where you can take your skills.
Yeah, and it's never too late. That's the thing, really. I'm no spring chicken, talking about growing up in front of the television in the 70s. You can guess that without going into the numbers. And
what, you had a television? Luxury. We grew up in front of
we had one of the first colour televisions in town, I'll have you know, in our shop. Yeah.
Really? I can't help thinking we didn't really deal with the ice cream enough, but that'll have to be for another time.
I'd love to tell you more about ice cream.
Can you make your own ice cream, and do you?
I have only ever once made a sorbet, and that's it. So no, I don't normally make ice cream. I do other Italian-inspired cooking, but I've never made ice cream. I can't be bothered with the whole machine and all of that, you know.
Fair enough. Any final things to round off with, Nicola?
You can promote yourself. Yeah, this is the invitation for you to tell everyone where they can find your books, your Instagram, or anything else you want.
Okay, so I write under the name N.A. Rossi. The books are the Rockstar Ending series, Rockstar Ending, Rock On and Rock Away. They also have playlists, which we didn't mention because there's lots of music in the books. And you can find them on all the usual big global platforms, just fairly easily in ebook and paperback. And if your local if your local bookstore doesn't stock it, that's what I was trying to say, then they can order them for you too. So, and I do sign for copies direct. Just contact me on my website, nicolarossi.com.
Any Instagram or other places?
Yes, I am on Instagram. So Instagram is Rockstar Ending. I am on Twitter as Nicola Rossi, or am I Rockstar Ending? Can't remember. But if you do search for Nicola Rossi, not the Italian opera singer, then that's me, or N.A. Rossi. Yes, I'm on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, bizarrely. Lots of my old corporate colleagues love my stuff on LinkedIn because it's so much more interesting than their corporate lives.
And I've got one final question, actually, which I meant to ask. Do your old corporate colleagues get in touch to say how pleased they are for you, or are they deeply, deeply envious of your success, having done something else with your life?
No, I have had only support and lovely comments from people. And actually, I had one. I've had a couple of notes from really senior people who have read my books, who have said that they loved them, and particularly the eye for detail around the corporate elements that I include.
Yeah, it's very convincing, the way it all gets spun into a marketing ploy. It's horribly persuasive. But look, we're in danger of just starting the interview all over again. So, Nicola, I think it's time to let everyone get back to Christmas and preparations and festivities. Can I thank you enormously for an incredibly honest, and I think we all know what we mean. There was a moment when, I nearly had to sort of walk out and take a 5-minute break. Incredibly honest, and I think that's the only approach, which is the only way this can ever really get at useful truths for other people. And so thank you for your generosity and openness about that.
Okay, I don't know if I should apologise for making you cry, but thank you for having me on the show.
Thank you so much. And thank you for listening. Bye for now. Don't miss future episodes of
Look, Mum, no hands.
Share and subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts, and give us a 5-star review on Apple.
If you are inspired to take that leap and join us on the show and share your experiences, or have a friend who might, message us on Instagram
at Look Mum No Hands Podcast. This has been a Talks with My Neighbour Productions, produced and hosted by Sarah Sharman and Daniel Confino. Music by George Twidell, artwork by Jane Confino, and title voiceover by Joshua Sharman.